During Darth Vader's pursuit to retrieve the plant of the Death Star, the Sith managed to trap the Tantive 4 using his Imperial I-class Star Destroyer known as the Devastator. Though Princess Leia managed to jettison the plant in an escape pod using C-3PO and R2-D2, she was captured by Vader's stormtroopers and taken to the Devastator. After a failed escape attempt, Leia was taken to the Death Star itself and to the detention block AA-23, despite her being a senator with diplomatic immunity. The dissolution of the Senate had rendered her only defense irrelevant, and as she sat in cell 2187, she was soon greeted by Darth Vader and an intimidating IT-0 interrogation droid. Despite being subjected to a truth serum, Leia remained resistant and did not give out the location of the rebel base. Vader also used his Force abilities to try and extract information from Leia, but her natural and trained willpower kept out Vader, and Tarkin resorted to using the Death Star superweapon to destroy Alderaan. But what if Darth Vader had sensed Leia was his daughter during the interrogation? Would this affect Vader's loyalty to the Emperor? Or would it in fact change Leia? Buried within the sub-levels of the technological terror called the Death Star, the detention block AA-23 was silent, apart from the distant whining of the garbage compactor on the same level. This would soon change, as the footsteps of two Imperial soldiers were overshadowed by the loud and clunkier steps of Darth Vader. The leading trooper pushed a blue button on the console of cell 2187, and the cell door slid vertically upwards to reveal its sole occupant, who was Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan. The daughter of Bail Organa had unsurprisingly refused to reveal the location of the rebel base, but Vader had an IT-0 interrogation droid, which he thought would break Leia. Vader instructed the droid to first use sonic torture and electroshocks, but after several minutes, he quickly realised that these would be ineffective, and he swapped them out for the truth serum. As the two troopers restrained Leia from any sudden movements, the syringe pierced the arm of the senator, and combining the effect of the dosage with the Force, Vader demanded to know the location of the rebel base. Despite the increased pressure, Leia refused to buckle, so returning to Grand Moff Tarkin, it seemed that he had a better idea. Vader returned to the cell occupied by Leia, but as she was being dragged to the control room by the Imperial troopers, the Sith's senses detected a Force signature. As Palpatine had often told him, he only needed to search his feelings for the truth, and the truth was that the signature felt much like Anakinskywalker's. The Sith briefly thought that somehow his old self had emerged, but soon an even more worrying thought emerged, and he connected the pieces of the puzzle to determine that Leia could be his daughter. With the training under Sidious, Vader attempted to dispel these thoughts as he joined the others in the control room, but as he observed the superweapon turning towards Alderaan, Vader ordered Tarkin to stop his attack. Tarkin turned to the towering Sith in shock, as Vader considered this opportunity to perhaps train Leia and rule the galaxy, and he would need Alderaan and the Organas for an even greater evil. Though Tarkin was displeased, as his sadistic self wanted to see Leia and the feeble rebellion suffer, he acknowledged Vader's request, and turned his attention to Leia's initial destination of Tatooine. Though it was obvious that Leia was lying to protect the rebels, Vader dispatched scouts to search Tatooine, and with Tarkin begrudgingly satisfied, the Sith began his new personal quest. Watching as Leia was escorted back to her cell, Vader returned to the Devastator and entered into his mobile meditation chamber. Now free of any distractions, Vader's mind was full of questions about Leia and her capabilities, but also thoughts about her heritage. The indoctrination under the Emperor had attempted to banish all thoughts of Anakin Skywalker and the Jedi, but now Vader wondered if Leia was the child of Anakin and Padme. Vader was aware of the risk of going to investigate Leia's ancestry, but he could not allow such doubts to remain on his conscience, especially if he had ambitions for more power. Boarding his personal starfighter, the Sith decided to begin his search where his life as a Jedi had truly ended, and that was the world of Mustafar. Despite an extensive search of the planet, and in particular the landing platform where he last saw Amidala, Vader left Mustafar empty-handed, so he wanted to travel to Naboo instead. But given the time he had already spent getting to Mustafar, Vader knew that the Emperor would not tolerate his absence from the battle station. On his journey back, he received news that the station's command was ignoring his instructions and going to destroy Alderaan unless Leia gave the location of the rebel base, as they had already found Tatooine to be abandoned. In the time that Vader travelled to Mustafar, the Millennium Falcon and its crew had safely made it to Alderaan, and waiting for them at Alderaan spaceport were Bray and Bail Organa. Though the Death Star's plans were in the hands of the Rebel Alliance, the absence of Leia and the destruction of Tatooine were of great distress, and they now planned for a way to save Leia and destroy the Death Star. As they're about to leave to a rendezvous point, near the real base of the Great Temple on Yavin 4, Obi-Wan detects an overwhelming and ominous feeling in the Force. The Jedi Master ordered everyone to evacuate, as if he had returned to being a Clone War general, and Organa issued a planet-wide broadcast to leave via the spaceport. What followed was a scene of organised chaos, as civilians scrambled to Organa's transport, taking orders from the Alderaan security, and with the policy of pacifism employed by the planet, there were no aerial sensors to warn them of impending doom, so they had to rely on Obi-Wan's judgment to time their escape. As the last wave of ships left Alderaan, the skies above the planet were swiftly darkened by the vast mobile station, which was the Death Star. Though Han Solo did not have any initial intentions of helping the rebellion, with the enormous debt he owed to Jabba the Hutt, the time he had spent refueling on Alderaan now placed him in the middle of the war. Even though he wanted to escape, the Death Star's tractor beam was too strong, and with several other unfortunate ships, they were drawn into the docking bays. Having maintained the same crew as before the arrival on Alderaan, they critically still had the presence of Obi-Wan, and the Jedi used a wide-spreading mind trick to order the other crews to hide and sneak up on the rushing stormtroopers. Had the officers within the Death Star been listening more thoroughly to what was going on within the ships they had just captured, then they would have heard a series of thumps as dozens of stormtroopers dropped to the floor. The crews of the captured ships took the armor and weapons of their victims, then made their way out of the ships, but the differing behaviours and heights of the stormtroopers made the officers suspicious. Obi-Wan was forced to use another mind trick before he made his way to the tractor beam, and this gave the crews time to dispatch the shocked officers in the hangars. But such fights across the docking bays did not go unnoticed, as alarms screamed across the Death Star, and reinforcements rushed to defend the battle station. The rampaging stormtroopers actually helped Obi-Wan, and using the chaos to disable the tractor beam, he wondered if this was also an opportunity to destroy the battle station. When he returned to the docking bay, most of the ships had already left, and he sensed a familiar presence. The screams of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker and the rescued Leia Organa forced him to move to the ramp of the Millennium Falcon, and ascending out of the docking bay, they see Vader arriving in his starfighter. The Sith though was too slow, owing to his journey to Mustafar, and before he could find the Corellian light freighter, Solo had begun the journey to Yavin 4. Obi-Wan knew that Vader was furious with his presence and existence, but he also felt conflict, just as he had done in their previous duel, and wondered why he had initially left the Death Star. Gazing over to Luke, who was pestering Captain Solo over the controls of the Falcon, he knew that he was too old to take on the Sith, and Luke's training had to speed up. During the journey to Yavin 4, Obi-Wan tried to teach Luke to meditate, which he hoped would help to correct his greatest weakness, which was his lack of patience. The Jedi Master quickly realised that Luke was much like Anakin, and he was growing frustrated with his lack of progress. So having seen how Luke enjoyed working with machines on Tatooine, he asked Han Solo if anything on the ship needed to be repaired. The smuggler pointed to one of his secret compartments, which had been damaged in the skirmish with the stormtroopers on the Death Star, and Obi-Wan asked Luke to repair the damage using moving meditation. This method was much more successful, but as Luke was about to complete the repair, he was interrupted by a shockwave in the Force. Obi-Wan sensed this too, and it seemed that the Death Star was already on the move, despite its latest infiltration by the Alderaanians, so they had to warn the rebels on Yavin 4. With most of the rebel command already at the Great Temple, General Dodona had found a weakness in the Death Star and planned an assault through the Meridian Trench, but to protect the base, they decided to use the smaller world of Tanab. The planet was not of major importance to the Empire, apart from residing on the Palamian trade route and being a notable residence for pirates, so using the Millennium Falcon as bait, they wanted to draw the Death Star into a trap. Han Solo was most displeased at this plan, having already been through multiple life-threatening situations over the past few days, and he didn't think he was being paid enough for the risks he was having to take. But with the target already on his back, from the Rhodians wanting revenge for Greedo, the negotiator Obi-Wan convinced him that following the order would earn him valuable favour, which would help with his debts. With the Death Star on their trail, Solo has little choice but to continue helping the rebels, and he tried to shake off the battle station by utilising dangerous smugglers' routes. Though the superweapon could not use the same routes as the Millennium Falcon, he knew he was being followed by a squadron of TIE fighters, so against the instructions of the other crew members, Solo turned to attack the Empire. As they approached the Tanab system, Solo left hyperspace, and once the anticipated TIE fighters emerged, he fired volleys of turret fire from the ship's ground buzzer blaster cannon, and the second wave of fighters was showered by shards of the first wave. Solo's bold tactics were read by the command on Tanab, and the rebels deployed a small squadron of X-Wing starfighters, which picked off the surprised TIE pilots. Aboard the Millennium Falcon, Obi-Wan was finding it strange that the TIE fighters were being lured in the trap, and looking out of the viewport to the other areas of the Tanab system, he sensed that the Empire was countering their trap with one of their own. Ordering Solo to retreat, the smuggler is reluctant but complies, and the X-Wings follow the Millennium Falcon to join the rest of the fleet. Obi-Wan's warnings proved to be accurate, as the Death Star emerged from the debris and it was time for the rebels to begin their attack. Like the rebels had planned, the Y-Wing bombers led by Gold Leader Vander and the X-Wings of the Red and Green squadrons began to swoop down to destroy whatever anti-aircraft turrets were in their path. When the TIE fighters emerged, Han Solo helped the less agile rebel ships, but the advantage of their brief counterattack was removed when Darth Vader emerged with his personal squadron. Two of the most formidable pilots now contested the narrow space in and around the trench, leaving Luke Skywalker and Chewbacca to pilot the pair of quad laser cannons. Struggling to lay any kind of hit on the Sith, Obi-Wan calmed the frustrated Luke, and he asked him to trust in the Force and his instincts, as his eyes could deceive him. Luke used his limited knowledge and experience of the Force, and it was as if the rotating turret was moving on its own, and firing a precise burst towards Vader's ship, it managed to clip one of the solar array wings, and Vader spiraled out of control. With all the other X-Wings and Y-Wings either being shot down or were out of commission, it was up to Han Solo to save the Alliance. The smuggler was joined by Chewbacca, whose seat on the quad laser cannon turret was taken by Obi-Wan, and because of the enormous width of the freighter, it had to fly through the trench sideways. The artificial gravity within the Millennium Falcon at least provided balance to its occupants, and firing ST-2 concussion missiles into the thermal exhaust port, Han Solo had met his target. Swooping at a near vertical angle to avoid the chain reaction, Chewbacca roared in approval as they left a trail of destruction in their wake, and Mon Mothma congratulated the crew before asking them to return to the base. When they returned to Yavin 4, Obi-Wan ensured that Han Solo got the bulk of the credit, which only slightly annoyed Luke, but the smuggler would make for a valuable ally. The Jedi resisted the urge to join the rebellion, but before he could resume Luke's training, he was surprised that Leia wanted to talk to him. Obi-Wan listened with great intent when Leia recalled what had happened in Cell 2187, and this confirmed to the Jedi that both Vader still had conflict within him, despite initially considering him as more of a machine than a man, and also that Luke was not their only hope. With both Luke and Leia now in danger from the Empire, there was no use in hiding their past from them, so Obi-Wan revealed that they were in fact twins born to a former senator of Naboo. The Jedi deliberately omitted the identity of Darth Vader because he wanted for them to discover that themselves when they were ready to learn the truth. Though Leia showed interest in learning the ways of the Force, she felt the Force was calling her away from the path of the Jedi after experiencing a vision in the early stages of her training, and Obi-Wan was slightly disappointed but left to train Luke. Learning from some of the mistakes he had made from training Anakin, Obi-Wan noticed how heavily affected Luke was by any losses in the rebellion, and much of his youthful overconfidence was replaced by commitment to the Jedi way. Once the Master deemed Luke to have a sufficient grasp of the Jedi path, he took Luke to the planet of Dagobah so he could further his training under Yoda. Whilst the Rebel Alliance and its cause was gaining momentum, the Empire was reeling from its latest defeat, and though Darth Vader had survived, he knew that his journey to Mustafar had cost valuable time, both to detain more high-ranking rebels and to destroy their base. Vader's confusing behaviour was reported by one of the only survivors of the Death Star's destruction, General Tag, and Vader was summoned to the Imperial Palace on Coruscant. As Vader later walked the steps to the throne of the remodelled room, he painfully knelt to bow to his master, and the Emperor asked him to rise to his feet. Ordering Vader to explain his departure from the Death Star when victory seemed in sight, Vader claimed that he had felt a disturbance in the Force during his examination of the princess, and Vader wanted to seek answers at his castle on Mustafar. Whilst this was partially true, he did not tell Palpatine the real reason for this departure from Leia and the Death Star, and he thought the Emperor had accepted his reasoning. As he moved to the side of the Emperor's throne, two royal guards appeared from the shadows, and Palpatine silently ushered for them to prod their force spikes into Vader. Palpatine almost looked amused as he watched Vader growling in pain, then embracing it by lifting both of the royal guards and slamming them into the closest wall. Now somewhat satisfied that Vader regained his grasp of his true darkness, Palpatine ordered General Tag and his apprentice to work together, both to establish a new chain of command and to hunt down the rebels. General Tag was also tasked with correcting Tarkin's error, and instead of devoting resources to one enormous superweapon, he set about adding super star destroyers to their existing navy. As the general bowed to the Emperor and left the temple, Palpatine warned Vader that further failure would not be tolerated, omitting the fact that he had a potential replacement lined up. The new task which had been delegated to Vader would allow him to pursue his personal goal of finding Leia's real heritage, which had been derailed by the Death Star. Travelling from Coruscant to the world of Naboo, the planet was under Imperial control, but it maintained much of its majesty, and Vader landed unopposed in the capital city of Theed. This was followed by a small trek to the mausoleum of Padme Amidala, which had been guarded heavily by surviving handmaidens, but as they were now busy serving the rebellion, Vader was free to examine the tomb. As he approached it, he started to clutch his head, when memories that had been buried for 2 decades resurfaced, and the Sith hunched over the tomb in pain. Sweeping the tomb with his gloved hand, Vader could detect a faint anomaly beneath him, so he took a nearby forensics droid for further analysis. Tracing a body to the world of Polis Massa, Vader's left somewhat disappointed by the lack of evidence on the asteroid, barring an abandoned midwife droid, which showed that Padme had been brought to the medical facility by Obi-Wan, and proved that Padme had still been alive after his force choke on Mustafar. Though the mere mentioning of the name Obi-Wan infuriated Vader, this was surpassed by the knowledge that Palpatine had lied to him, and it added to his defiant attitude towards Palpatine since the incident with Leia. It seemed to Vader that the only way to find the truth of Leia's heritage was to find Obi-Wan and Bail Organa, with Organa the more likely of the two to be found. To combine his personal goals with the orders of the Emperor, Vader was given an opportunity when he was summoned to the weapons factory on Simoon 1, which was of utmost importance for the Empire. The Sith was well aware that the factory was a prime target to the rebels, especially after their success with the Death Star, and General Tagg had increased the security. As he approached the moon in a Lambda-class shuttle, he could now sense the presence of Leia a lot more clearly than he had before, and he wondered if Obi-Wan had had an influence, or if his own perception had improved. These thoughts were cast to one side, as those on the Devastator reported that they were in position to ensure nobody left the system, and Vader dived down to Simoon 1's surface. As he breached the breathable atmosphere, he was bombarded with desperate cries, as the rebels were threatening to destroy the factory and free the slave workers. The Sith was still thinking about Leia and their potential connection, when the Force alerted him to a warning, and he violently tilted the ship out of the path to avoid blaster fire from the rebels beneath him. Leaping out of the ship before it combusted into flames, Vader landed on the ground with a thud, and any stormtroopers in his proximity were blown away as he then ignited his lightsaber. Ordering the facility to be placed on lockdown, Vader was now searching for the rebels, and scanning the area from the top of an AT-AT walker, he sees a potential evacuation point hidden amongst the wreckage. The Sith moved with incredible agility to the location, but he was soon interrupted from his charge when he saw a series of large shadows above him. A small fleet of rebel ships had been faster than he and the Devastator, and had been hiding on the other side of the Simoon system, so Vader had to change his plan to deploy TIE fighters and TIE interceptors. The rebel ships were onto him as soon as he issued his orders, and he began to rapidly repel the turret fire with his lightsaber until spotting a large ship over the battle. Though Vader could not see the ship obscured by the clouds, he knew that it was some kind of large blockade runner, which most likely housed the rebel command. Vader now had the choice of defending the factory from the rebels, or pursuing the larger ship, and with Leia at the forefront of his mind, the choice was simple. The Sith saw a squadron of rebel starfighters approaching him in formation, and reaching into the air, he pulled the last X-Wing in the squadron towards him. The unfortunate pilot of the T-65B was desperately engaging the fusional thrust engines, but Vader was stronger, and the X-Wing grinded to the ground with a shudder before the rest of the squadron circled back around. Throwing the pilot out of the canopy and into the crossfire, Vader boarded the X-Wing against the pleas of his subordinates and troopers, and flew directly towards the blockade runner. The CR-90's corvette's occupants had been warned that they had lost one of their starfighters, but they did not expect to see it heading straight for their ship. Before the array of turbo laser turrets and cannons could be activated, the ship suddenly jolted, as Vader detached his X-Wing to the roof of the ship and began to walk to the entrance, with the help of the breathing apparatus in his suit. The rebels within were scrambling to their defensive positions, some of them quivering after hearing stories of what had happened on the Profundity when Vader unlocked the airlock hatch with the Force. The chief rebel officer motioned for the troopers to prepare for anything, and as Vader entered, he ordered for the troopers to bring them to Bail Organa and the rebel command. Before they could respond, Organa stood at the end of the corridor, looking resplendent and majestic in his Alderaan cloak, and asked Vader what he wanted. The Sith was not surprised by Organa's defiance, and ordered him to tell the real story behind Leia Organa, having sensed that she was Force sensitive. Organa was reluctant, as the reason Obi-Wan and Yoda had separated the children was that they would be sought after by the Emperor for their Force potential, but the lives of the rebel troopers were also on the line. Gesturing with his hand for the rebel troopers to lower their weapons, Vader does not detect any ill intent from Organa, but just as he is about to walk towards the back of the ship, they are hit by another jolt as the Imperial TIE fighters moved in. Vader's decision to abandon the main mission and instead go for the command ship had forced the Empire to pursue the rebels instead of defending the factory, and the trail of the Millennium Falcon had led them to the blockade runner. Within the larger ship, Vader was one of the first to recover from the attack, but he saw that the rebels had slid away from him and towards the escape pods. Lashing out with his lightsaber at the walls of the corridor, Vader ran through the ship and looked for any holodiscs he could find before it started to crumble. Climbing the exterior of the ship, Vader had to leap across various tumbling sections, then arrived at the area where he had docked his X-Wing. Despite the battle that had engulfed the blockade runner, the X-Wing was still serviceable, and Vader returned to the world of Mustafar and his fortress. Once he entered his throne room, Vader took a seat on his throne and started to place and watch all of the holodiscs he had recovered from the rebel command ship. Most of these recordings were either useless sentimental clippings, or was information already obtained by the Empire's spies, before he chanced upon one which got his attention. Vader discerned that the date of the recording was during the Empire's move to take Alderaan in his absence, and Organa was conversing with a hooded figure Vader knew to be Obi-Wan. Shoving aside his hate for the Jedi to listen to their words, it seemed like Organa was preparing to meet his fate, and had instructed for Obi-Wan to take care of the twins. This surprised Vader, as he had not even contemplated the possibility of Padme having 2 children, and as he continued to listen, he felt a surge of anger when they stressed that the children mustn't know their connection to Vader until they were prepared. Crushing the holodisc with the Force, Vader's breathing was now heavier and more pronounced, and glaring at the lava-covered terrain out of the throne room window, he vowed for revenge against the Emperor for lying about Padme, then Obi-Wan for hiding Leia and Luke. But the reality was that Vader was not as powerful as the Emperor, and he would always be a slave to his machinations, so he would need more to defeat him. Before he could continue with his own plans, Vader received a furious transmission from Coruscant, with Palpatine demanding for him to return and explain his actions on Simoon 1. The defiant apprentice could not put off this encounter, but after gaining inspiration from watching Organa's holodiscs, a plan against Palpatine started to formulate in his mind. When he returned to Coruscant and the Imperial Palace, Palpatine's fury had considerably increased from their previous meeting, and the Emperor could sense Vader's loyalties wavering, so he decided to remind him of who the true master would always be. Extending his fingertips to cast his lightning attack, Vader was too late to defend himself, and he was left sprawling on the throne room floor in agony as Palpatine looked at him with disgust. Ordering for Vader to get to his feet, Palpatine assigned him to negotiate with Jabba the Hutt on Tatooine, and warned him that his next punishment would be his last. Vader slowly got to his feet and turned out of the throne room, but rather than heading for his ship, he went to the Imperial Inspectorate. The unexpected presence of Vader was a shock to the Imperial commander of the headquarters, but the Sith was not here for a tour of the facilities, as he ordered for all of the recruits to be lined up. Wordlessly walking past them with consideration, Vader knew he didn't possess the subtlety of his master, but he could discern the loyalty of all of these recruits without using the Force. Informing the commander that he was pleased with the effort of the recruits, Vader declined the offer for a guide, and he marched over to the surveillance room. The security had been heightened since the Clone War, and every breath of the recruits were being monitored, so Vader was able to confirm the feelings he had when he previously walked past them. After an extensive examination, Vader selected a number of candidates for his most important mission, which was to weaken the Emperor. Invading the minds of these unsuspecting Imperials, he convinced them that they had been specially selected to meet the Emperor, and asked them to meet him at a supply depot for further instructions. Vader now departed to fulfill the mission assigned to him by Palpatine, and the Sith made his way to the world of Tatooine, but when he approached the planet, he sensed that his mission was going to be anything but simple. His ship, which had been hastily recovered and repaired after the crash on Simoon 1, was evidently in need of more repairs, and during his descent, Vader struggled to direct the ship as it speared off in another direction to his coordinates. Though Vader was able to cushion the impact, he was a considerable distance from Jabba's palace, but he sensed a presence in the Force. Stumbling out of the wreckage, the Sith scanned his surroundings, but was disturbed by the ignitions of 2 lightsabers. Turning to face the cause of the noise, he sees Obi-Wan and Luke standing in front of him, unaware that they had returned to the planet to collect Obi-Wan's old notes. Vader prepared himself to fight the Jedi, even with the minor injuries he had just sustained, and he asked Luke if he knew the truth behind his past. Obi-Wan's expression didn't change, but Vader knew that the Jedi was surprised by his knowledge, and he declared that Luke was his son. Luke's subsequent roar was so loud and violent that the sand around them began to shake, and banthas in the vicinity nearly toppled to the ground. Obi-Wan and Vader had shielded themselves with the Force, and Vader tried to take advantage by moving towards the older Jedi, but his injury slowed his progress. An enraged Luke slashed wildly with his blade, which had once belonged to Anakin Skywalker, and Vader howled as the blade cut into his helmet. Obi-Wan ordered for Luke to prepare their escape, knowing Vader would grow angrier and more powerful, but unlike their previous duel, Obi-Wan saw something more than hate, which was hope. Leaving Vader buried beneath a vast mound of sand, Obi-Wan turned to the ship and made his escape with Luke, just avoiding Vader's hands grasping at the sand. The Sith was angry at himself as he was faced with the prospect of taking the perilous trek to Jabba's palace, so he decided to try and repair his TIE Advanced starfighter. Working tirelessly into the night, using equipment fashioned from nearby moisture vaporators, Vader was exhausted and his suit was working overtime to maintain his health, but his biggest problem was the extent of the damage to the ship. Just as all possible solutions were running out, a sandcrawler wheeled past, and the Jawas within were looking at both the wreckage and Vader with greed. The Sith was not in any mood for negotiations, and choking any Jawas who emerged from the sandcrawler, he trudged into their home. Making his way to the cargo hold, he found hundreds of droids collected by the Jawas, so he commanded them to help repair his ship. The TIE Advanced starfighter was now operating at its optimum level of performance, and Vader piloted the ship towards Jabba's palace for what had become an unnecessarily extended mission. Once he convinced Jabba to allow for the supply of materials to his territory, Vader returned to the Devastator to recover from his injuries and prepared for his greatest mission. The Sith secretly contacted the recruits he had scouted at the Imperial Inspectorate and told them to meet him at a warehouse in one of Coruscant's lower levels, as he also left a coded message for the Rebel Alliance. When he arrived at the designated location, the recruits were waiting in their pristine uniforms, and Vader invaded their minds to prey on their infidelities to the Emperor. As they writhed in agony to fend off his attack, Vader levitated a series of innocuous-looking capsules, which actually contained the lethal virus Aort-6. These were set to activate on a time delay, so Vader dispatched his recruits to the Imperial Palace, whilst he waited patiently for a weakened Palpatine. The first part of the operation went smoothly, with Vader providing the recruits with a secret entrance to the palace, and releasing the gas into the airways and corridors. Imperial officers were quickly dropping to the ground. Vader was about to move to the palace, when he was stopped by a solitary cargo ship flying overhead, and he knew that these were disguised rebels, arriving considerably earlier than anticipated. The Sith was now stuck until summoned by the Emperor, and he could now see the rebels rushing to infiltrate the palace. After the first few rebels fell, the rest equipped gas masks and began to wade through the Imperial bodies, when Vader was finally contacted by a desperate-sounding Emperor. Rushing through the same entrance used by his recruits, Vader advanced to the Emperor's throne room, and there he saw Palpatine almost crawling on the ground. As the Emperor asked for medical assistance, Vader raised his lightsaber to strike his master down, but even in his weakened state, the Sith diverted the blade to his legs. The pain gave him more power, and directing a surge of electrical current to Vader, the apprentice had been foolish to assume that Palpatine was weak. As Vader stumbled into the wall, the rebels rushed in, and seeing Palpatine first, they started to fire their blasters towards him. The feeble rebel attack was easily repelled by the Emperor, but when they retreated to think of another strategy, the Emperor suddenly fell silent. The poison from Vader's virus had broken into Palpatine's respiratory system, and on the other side of the room, Vader was struggling from the electrical current coursing through his suit and body. Before the rebels could turn their attention to his dying body, Luke rushed in with Leia, and they displayed little remorse for someone who had inflicted such misery. With Vader's last words, he told them that Leia shared similarities with Padme, and together they would continue the legacy of the Skywalkers.